This is a 2002 Ford Ranger 4-wheel drive with automatic transmission. Had a problem with the gear shifter being hard to move through the gears and slipping out of park once in a while. I went ahead and blocked the rear wheel. Since the shifter's so hard to change gears, either the cable's bad, the shaft's galled up going through the transmission, or the trans range sensor's galled up, which is external in the transmission and can typically do that very thing. With this slack in it, it's going to be a couple loose torx bits on an arm that hangs off the steering column that drives the cable through the gears, and those screws will have to be tightened up and some Loctite put on them, ideally, to keep them from coming loose again. I'm going to go underneath and release the cable and see if this is easier to change gears or not, and that'll help isolate if the cable's a problem. I've raised the body up a few inches and set it on the jack stand right where the control arm hinges on the frame. And first thing I want to do is go underneath and disconnect the shift cable from the transmission, and then try to shift it, narrow it down. Say I've blocked the rear wheel so the truck won't roll over me or anything. Jack stand will probably hold it, but see what's happening underneath here. And there's the shift cable. Sometimes it can get galled up in that, where that nut is. The shaft can. Heat from the exhaust pipe. I'm going to just stick a pair of needle nose in behind that and pop the cable off of it. And it's unhooked. Let's see if we can manually shift the transmission. The wheels are blocked. That's a little stiff. I've got the cable off. That's a lot easier. So I expect either the trans range sensor is galled up or the shaft going through the transmission is. So I'll go back underneath and start taking it apart. I'm making sure that the wheel is blocked up so the truck doesn't have any chance of rolling back and forth while I'm pulling with the shifter linkage on the transmission. The first thing I'm going to do is push this center in on this trans range electrical connector and unplug it. Just kind of lay it out of the way. Take an 8mm or 5/16 and loosen and or remove these two bolts holding the trans range sensor to the transmission. This big nut is a 22mm. Until that the transmission range sensor is galled to it, I can make the truck shifter move just by moving the range sensor. So it's what's causing it to be galled up to the shifter shaft. It's moving the arm and everything with the shifter. That's not a good thing. So it's going to need a new trans range sensor. Just threw a bolt through a bar with holes in it. It's got a nut on the back side loosely installed to catch that arm, and then the other holes catching the pin sticking out for the shifter, and that'll hold that arm into place. This nut is it's about 35 pounds. And I've got it back. Just put a wrench on it and hold this bar. It's a little gold up. Let's break loose. Just a about 3/4 inch long bolt with a nut stuck on it. That arm catches in that slot. And then the bar goes against the frame right there, so that'll hold it stable. Works pretty good. Just remember your arm faces up at 12 o'clock. I'm going to spray some penetrating oil. I don't know if you can see it's gunked up pretty bad. Spray some penetrating oil on that shaft and the box around it, and get some lubrication on it. Then slide that box off of there and get a replacement for it. This one's stuck on there pretty good. I took a skinny screwdriver and tapped all along the inside of the plastic in a circle, or at least 2/3 of one, and then been prying up from the center on both sides. Be careful, there is a seal stuck in the transmission directly behind this. If you damage it, it'll pour transmission fluid out of it. I had the best luck. Pry it to the inside on the front, and then the back, then pull on the top towards you to get it tilted facing down a little bit, and pry on the front and the back, and then pull on the top. It's moving along now. Nasty. Scuttled up. It's really wanting to be stuck to that plastic ring. And that is what is causing the shifter to be so hard to shift. Take a wire brush and go over this shaft before we put the new one on it. I'm sure the shifter will cooperate now. It's easy now. It's a lot easier. Go ahead and stick it in neutral for preparation for the new one. I'll take some wire brush to that, maybe some sandpaper, clean that off. Make sure the seal isn't damaged behind it here. It'll have a new one put in. Clean all that off. The new part has arrived. both 11 pins. I put a thin layer of grease inside of this plastic tube. Be paying particular attention to the thin line, one on the white plastic, one on the black plastic. It says neutral up above it. I'll slip this on there. The transmission should be in neutral. And when I tighten the 5/16 bolts down, that line should be perfectly aligned to set this so that the backup lights come on and it'll start in park and neutral, and the computer knows what gear it's in. It has 2 raised up slots on it inside of the white plastic tube, and then the shift shaft on the transmission has 2 slots to accommodate that. I'll be aligning that up to slide it on there. I've already cleaned the rust off the shaft, and this grease should slow the rust down a little bit. Got the shaft pretty cleaned off. The shaft is nice and metal colored again instead of rust. I'll wash those 2 slots. Go ahead and put the transmission in the neutral, or make sure it's in neutral. The shifter's in park, so all the way back is park. And it's springy to the back, not toward the front. The reverse, neutral. And I'll take the new box, plug in, pointing to the back, and line those slots up. That's the bumps inside of this. And if it's a little rough, take a socket and push on this center plastic part until it goes down. I wouldn't recommend pushing on the outer part. I took an 18mm deep well and just kind of tapped that center plastic down until these aluminum boxes started touching the transmission case, and the whole thing would drag against it. And I put the 5/16 8mm headed bolts in, watching the alignment. Just make sure you got this plastic tube down far enough for these aluminum pieces that would be touching the transmission case. You don't want it bowing to pull it down, and this drags a little bit when you turn it back and forth. And I snug these bolts down evenly just till they made contact on both sides, and then a little more, and I'll verify to make sure the backup light and that it starts in park and stuff, and that the backup light comes on. I'm going to go ahead and plug this connector in. And make sure the clip snaps, locks on, and put the arm back on. It has 2 flat bladed slots in it, just like the shift shaft does, on top and bottom. wiggle it till it sits flat on it. Put this 22mm nut back on the way it come off. It's shiny on the side. It's facing the shift arm. And take a 22mm and hold this shaft and torque this nut down to 35 foot-pounds. Be sure and use some type of backup on it. You don't want to bend your linkage inside the transmission or you will have problems. So that's park. Push it back one notch. Back up like should be on. And they are. Just see them coming on the back of the truck. And that's park. I'll go ahead and hook the cable up. I'm going to tighten these 5/16 bolts down a little more since we're in business. It only torques to like 100 inch-pounds. And just push the cable back on to the pin. And that's the slack and the loose Torx bit bolts up on the back of the steering column. We'll deal with that next. Go ahead and check and make sure the starter works in park. And it does. And that it don't work in reverse. And it works in neutral. And doesn't work in drive or second or first. Everything's where it needs to be. Now I'll need to just slack out of the shaft down the end of the steering column. You can take this kick panel off, but it really don't afford much extra room. There's two Torx bits on that shifter arm up here. There's a problem, they're loose. And that's kind of a safety issue in my opinion. How loose that thing is. Falling out of there. Now I typically pull them out and I'll put some blue Loctite on them and put them back in there and tighten them down. There's two of them. Takes a T30 Torx bit with a short extension and a ratchet out to get you out. Or you can just tighten them back down, but you might have to deal with it again if you don't put some Loctite on them. Those two bolts are got best. The top one's best got down in first gear. The shifter down in first, and then the bottom one's got with it in park. I held my left hand on the gear shifter and then tighten the Torx bit bolts down with my right hand to keep from stressing the transmission linkage components out. It's not so floppy now. Solid. Just a slack in the column. Can actually get first gear now, and all the way in the park. Very little effort. You gotta push your brake down to release it out of the park. Well, that should make it safe again. Took a lot of the slack out of the shifter now. Good to go.